Good evening and welcome to Representative Cindy Ryu's virtual town hall. You may submit your questions live via the comments section during this event, so please submit your questions now and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Before we begin answering questions, I'd like to open the floor up to Representative Ryu for some opening remarks. Rep. Ryu, the floor is yours.
Thank you so very much, everyone, for joining us today. I am Cindy Ryu, representing the 32nd Legislative District, and I am privileged to be serving my 8th term. So this is my 15th year in Olympia during our legislative session. I am serving as the chair of the Technology, Economic Development, and Veterans Committee, as well as serving on Consumer Protection and Business Committee, as well as Appropriations Committee. Besides those three committees, I also serve as a member of the Washington Tourism Marketing Authority, as well as the current president of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region. I also am active in the National Conference of State Legislators, and I am serving on their task force on artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and privacy, as well as the FCC's Intergovernmental Advisory Committee as a member. And there's an informal working group from Commerce, and that's the Washington State CHIPS Act working group. So I am quite busy, which is a good thing. As many of you probably are paying attention to our Washington State's budget, we are facing a shortfall of about $15 billion, with several billion more needed to address school funding shortages. So the problem statement is that over the past decade, nearly 1 million more people have made Washington State their home. And that drove up the demand for vital services like schools, housing, healthcare, as well as childcare. And so these essential services are disproportionately funded by working families, while the very wealthy pay the least unfortunately, under our Washington State's regressive tax system. And so our tax system, which was built nearly a century ago, is failing to meet the needs of our rapidly growing state. And it is increasing our income inequality. And so the gaps between working families and the gains by the wealthiest in a state have resulted in not enough funding for schools, a safety net that is at risk every time revenue collections drop or costs go up, and every average Washington residents are at the same time struggling to make ends meet. And so that's why our budget discussions over the last few months, beginning in the summer actually, have always included determining savings and finding efficiencies within the budget, as well as new revenue opportunities. And so I thought from the couple of chat with Cindy's that I've conducted over the weekends, past 2 weekends, constituents are interested in what new revenue sources are we looking at, because an all cuts budget was devastating, literally devastating. People would die under an all cuts budget. And so we are definitely considering at least 3 new revenue bills. And so here are the numbers, because I didn't have them ready last weekend. House Bill 2046 is by Representative Berg from Mill Creek, and that is property tax fairness through financial intangible assets tax. As you all know, property owners, if you own your home or any other real estate, we're paying taxes every single year. But not the intangibles like stocks and bonds. So mutual funds, index funds, and so on. So House Bill 2046 imposes a property tax of $8 on every $1,000 of assessed value on certain financial intangible assets, but with the first $50 million exempt. So anyone who has more than 50 million, from the 50 million plus $1, then they'll be paying $8 on every 1,000. And we're hoping that will generate approximately $2 billion per year beginning in 2027. And that will go to Education Legacy Trust account to support Washington families and fund vital investments in our K through 12 schools. And we think there'll be about 4,300 wealthy Washingtonians who will pay the taxes. And let's see. I think I've got the numbers as to which districts have those, most of those 4,300 Washingtonians. The first top 10, I would say, legislative districts are 48th LD, 43rd LD, 41st, 45th, 36th, 46th, 34th, 23rd, 40th, and 5th LDs, legislative districts. So 32nd does not make it into the top 10 legislative districts. I'm sure some constituents, however, do have more than 50 million, and so they may be subject to this tax. The next bill that we hope will raise some, not as much, is House Bill 2049. That is prime sponsored by Representative Berquist, who is an educator, so he understands what it means to fund our schools amply. And so this is increasing state and local flexibility to fund schools and public safety. If you will remember the Tim Eyman initiative from a long time ago, quite a few years ago, 747, I believe, was the number, where the reaction of the legislature at that time was to institute a 1% cap. So this one modifies the state and local property tax authority and adjusts the school funding formula by maintaining the 1% growth, but allowing for increases based on inflation and population change, but not to exceed 3%. So that gives, and it's not a 3% on every $1,000 or every property, but it's just that growth factor. So I believe the impact might be about $50 per household, per house maybe. And if your house is, more valuable than the median, it might be a little bit higher than that. It also adjusts levy equalization methods to ensure equitable funding for historically underinvested areas of our states, including rural school districts. And so hopefully that mitigates the widening funding gaps between schools. And so the Department of Revenue estimates this might raise $50 million, the state part of it, about $50 million in fiscal year 2026 and another $150 million in fiscal year 2027. The last and the third major one is House Bill 2045, which is sponsored by Representative Joe Fitzgibbon, who is also majority leader in the House. And this is a surcharge on high grossing corporations and financial institutions. As you know, we don't have a state income tax, and instead, many businesses are paying B&O taxes. So this bill is designed for an extra 1% business and occupation tax on businesses with taxable income over 250 million. So it does not hit the mom and pop stores or businesses or even medium-sized businesses. But if they are earning taxable income is over $250 million, then the modest surcharge is only to be applied to perhaps about 400 businesses statewide. And so hopefully that will leave the working families and small businesses where most of our constituents are employed, actually. They will be remain unaffected. It also includes an increase to surcharge on a specified financial institutions, not credit unions, because there was a question about that. And we think about 200 financial institutions that have an annual net income of $1 billion or more. So that's net income of $1 billion or more. Instead of paying the 1.2% right now, they would pay another 0.7%. So it go up to 1.9%. So under this proposal, affecting about 600 businesses, we think we will raise another $600 million in the 2026 biennium and nearly $2 billion in fiscal year 2027. So hopefully that will ensure a revenue stream that shields essential public services from any economic downturns and political uncertainty, and hopefully create a more stable and sustainable financial future for the state. And specifically, many questions were posed to me about schools. school funding, obviously. Some schools are, I don't think ours, but some schools are facing potential of bankruptcy. And they are already telling their school buildings as to how many people will be laid off. And so that's an unprecedented number of educators and non-certificated staff in our schools. And so because they're not sure that they'll be able to fully fund education. And so with those three bills, along with a whole bunch of other considerations, including balancing, we will have to have some cuts in our budget, but hopefully not an all cuts budget, because as I mentioned, it will be devastating. And so we are considering a budget appropriations bill that kind of balances both maintaining as many of the services as possible and fund as much of schools as possible, but with efficiencies to save money. And so I will absolutely be paying a lot of attention to MSOC or special education or transportation funding, and absolutely fighting for higher special funding on all of those. But unfortunately, all or nothing, which has been a request from some of our constituents, all or nothing won't work. And so not being able to fully fund education, especially in this year's budget and situation, is not a reason for me to be voting against the budget. And so, but at the same time, we are proposing that children do eat, are housed, and have access to healthcare and other basics social safety nets, so that when they do come to school, they are ready to learn. So with that, I am willing to take questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Repriu. Just wanted to remind everyone watching that you're watching a live virtual town hall with your 32nd Legislative District Representative Cindy Ryu, and you can submit questions in the comment section. There's actually a question that came in around education funding while you were speaking from, I believe it's from Lanaya, and they are asking, if these sources of revenue pass, how soon would schools feel relief?
Yeah. So our goal has always been to keep as much of the schools whole as possible. So we've been looking at not just future years, because these these new revenues, as I mentioned, do come in the next biennium, but and a lot more toward the end of the biennium. So we will be able to, especially once we see that they are passing, we will be able to hopefully balance it out for 2026, as well as definitely 2027. And that is obviously based on federal government following through on their promises of congressional promises of funding our schools and our Medicaid and other many different programs that we depend on the federal government. But I guess we will face those realities once we face them. We will face them. I'm sure I'm sorry. I'm really not that hopeful about the federal government being there for us like it had been the last few years when we were going through really difficult times. But we will do the best we can, and absolutely these are the revenue bills that I will be voting for, and hopefully we also have support in the Senate, and they also have other proposals as well. So I think we will be looking at them in totality as we get closer to the end of the session, and hopefully we are able to balance the budget and be hopefully better than what we are proposing at this time.
Great. Thank you so much for that response, Rep. Ryu. We're now going to go to some questions that have been submitted ahead of time or into your office. Just a reminder that if you have a question and you're listening in, please feel free to put that into the comments section. This question is, you helped pass a law requiring a 5-year economic plan for Washington State. How will this plan help local businesses, workers, and communities thrive?
Yes, thank you. The bill unfortunately did not pass because it does take resources for us to plan ahead for the next 5 years. But my thought was that if we can plan to coordinate economic development throughout the whole state instead of us doing it county by county at this time, because we provide very little funding, but we do ask associate development organizations to plan for their counties and to help their businesses attract their counties and cities attract businesses and help those who are starting out to be much better prepared to succeed. But we will eventually get there, even though the investment would have been very little. At this time, we are looking under every budget, I guess, rock to save as much money as we could. And so I could not get this new program started, which is fine. I'm sure we'll be doing one form or another to prepare for that at the committee level, if not at the regional level.
Great, thank you so much. Our next question is another pre-submitted question. So you've worked on several bills to support veterans. Can you share how House Bill 1541 and House Bill 1102 will improve services and opportunities for veterans in our state?
Yes, our veterans are they serve the country, and what I learned more recently is that they were not paid that well. And so even though they have veterans benefits, some of them are not able to access it because either they did not reach out or because actually to access any federal benefits is pretty complicated. And so both of the bills were trying to reach out to veterans to provide them more services, because every dollar that they're able to access means that we don't have to front the money ourselves out of our state now strained budget. And so both of them would have helped veterans access their earned benefits. So I thought it was the right thing to do, especially because many of them, whether they originated from Washington State or not, they decided to settle in Washington State as a retiree, because we do have a huge veteran and military community in Washington State, thankfully. And so since they served to protect our nation, and especially those who served in the National Guard, they also were helping us with wildfires. And so, especially when they need us, I thought it would make a lot of sense for us to help them, especially in accessing federal benefits that literally brings home the dollars from the federal government. So those efforts were very bipartisan, because I think everybody gets it, that the more we help the veterans, the better the quality of their life. And of course, when they're spending those benefits, whether it's the GI Bill or veterans benefits such as through their health care and so on, those are creating jobs for Washingtonians.
Great. Thank you so much for your response, Rep. Ryu. I just wanted to remind everyone who's tuning in this evening that you're watching a live virtual town hall with Representative Cindy Ryu, and you can submit your questions in the comments. We're now going to go to a question around housing. So housing prices and rent are getting harder to afford, and many people are struggling. What are House Democrats doing to help people find and keep affordable housing?
Absolutely. So I spent 5 years as the Housing Committee Chair. It was very obvious to me that we had both an affordability problem and a lack of supply problem. So for quite a few years now, we've been working on the supply side, not as fast as I wish we could build, but we've been working very well, in my opinion, but not fast enough. And so we also are working, we worked several years on a rent stabilization bill. Some will call it a rent control bill. When they were first proposed, I did not think they would work very well. And so I've made some suggestions to make it work better. And so last year it passed out of the House successfully, but obviously it did not move out of the Senate. This year, I am much more hopeful that it will. We also voted it out of the House, and so now it is in the Senate. And hopefully, the senators will be able to vote it into law so that tenants face no higher, at the most, 7% increase each year, or some of the years if the landlords do not need to raise it more than every single year, but no more than 7%. And there are other, guidelines as to how the noticing of the rent increases are, so the tenants have plenty of time to prepare whether they decide to stay in the same unit or look for other housing. And so I think it's a very well balanced bill that should work quite well for the tenants, but also even for the landlords, because we have many what I call mom and pop landlords that that use their either the house that they're living in and they're renting out a room or two, or a couple of houses, whether they own just one or more units. That bill should work out quite well. And you can plan ahead because it will bring certainty to both the tenants as well as to the landlords. And I know, having been a commercial landlord, I know certainty is gold. And it really helps tenants to plan ahead, and it really helps landlords to have, and the more stable their tenants are, the better it is for them, because every time there's a turnover, it costs money. And so hopefully it will bring stability to the housing market while we are busy trying to increase our housing supply.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. Our next question is around public safety. So we all want safe communities. What steps are being taken to address crime while also making sure, while also making sure police have the right training and tools to do their jobs effectively?
Yeah, absolutely. So Senator Lovick from Mill Creek, he's been working really hard to make sure that we have enough training slots, because what we have found was that we would train state patrol officers, and then because we were paying them so low, they would get hired away by local police agencies and cities and counties and sheriffs. And so we did increase their pay a few years ago, but even then we still didn't have enough public safety officers or police officers throughout the whole state. And so, for instance, in Seattle, they may be funding police slots, and yet they cannot fill those slots. And so he's been working really hard, along with many other legislators, on creating more capacity. And so I believe yesterday morning they were ringing the bell for another class up in North Skagit County, I think. Anyway, so we are creating more capacity that way. And of course, we've had quite a few public safety bills, and so balancing that has been quite a job for I would say for Representative Goodman, who has been chairing that committee for as long as I remember, the last 15 years at the least. And so he's been very very thoughtful, in my opinion, in how that balance is being established. And I actually even introduced a couple of bills this year, but also another series of bills, which is on catalytic converter thefts. So I am delighted to have worked closely with the King County Prosecutor's Office in introducing and passing House Bill 2153 last year, and it is going into effect next month. And that bill, of course, built on the success of the previous bill, which was House Bill 1815 in 2022, and that, along with the changes, I guess, in the market price of the valuable rare minerals in them. To a remarkable 77% decline in theft rates because it was rampant. And if you had your catalytic converter stolen, you never forget it because of the absolute devastation, emotionally, that it was stolen from your vehicle, but then also the real cost of getting it, either getting a new one or having to total the car because it was too expensive to replace. And so this 2153, it sends a clear message to people who are trafficking multiple and possessing multiple catalytic converters that it is an illicit activity, and makes it easier for the prosecutors to nab and hopefully discourage this activity. And so hopefully that will safeguard vehicle owners' property and businesses, because some businesses had the entire fleet targeted, and so those financial losses will hopefully address the disruptive impacts on the individuals and economies and public safety. Absolutely. And so I think I am approaching proactive enforcement through making things work better. And so I've also introduced, and it looks like a couple of bills that I introduced this year are passing on refining the definition of what a hate crime is. And then the other one is knowingly disseminating images as well as recordings of people that are forged. For instance, a particular principal was because the employee had been fired. I guess she thought she would embarrass him or ruin his reputation by creating a video that sounded like him and looked like him, making really bad remarks, and it was devastating to him. And so that particular bill actually has bipartisan support, and so I'm hopeful that that bill will also pass this year.
Great, thank you so much. Just as a reminder, you're watching a live virtual town hall with Representative Cindy Ryu from the 32nd Legislative District, and you can submit a question in the comments section. We're now going to go to a question on childcare. So finding affordable, quality childcare is a huge challenge. What are you working on to make childcare more available and affordable for working parents?
Yeah, absolutely. I have one grandchild. She's in California, but her mother, my daughter, who went to Shorewood, class of 2003, I think. Anyway, she is a school teacher, and because of the high cost of childcare, she decided to get another job, another teaching job actually, but at half the pay, so that she could stay home most of the time, so she could do most of her work online. And so I know how expensive it is and how difficult it is to find appropriate childcare. I believe Representative Bergquist, who's the chair of early learning, they have been working on, and in the past, I believe we increased quite a bit of the slots for early learning, but we are not able to as robustly fund positions, but we are absolutely committed to continue to do as much of that as possible. Another challenge, obviously, is because we cannot they're not paid as well as they should be above the minimum wage. And especially through the pandemic, many of them did not come back to provide childcare services. And so it's a very challenging arena, and I wish we had way better fiscal situation so we could literally pay for a lot more childcare slots, but we can't. But because we need as many moms and dads to be able to go to work, because we fortunately still have a pretty robust employment market, but absolutely concerned. I would say, in addition to fully funding schools, which I know we are not doing yet, childcare is right up there as far as the importance of paying attention to and funding as much as we can as we go along.
Great. Thank you so much, Rep. Ryu. And as we've been speaking, some of the live questions that have come in are mainly about education funding. So I was wondering if you would be willing to just reiterate some of what you said on education funding at the beginning of this call, just for those who may have joined a little bit late.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And the comment about shoreline schools, which all three of my children went through, two of them did go to Edmond schools as well. And so I'm a huge believer of public education. And we literally, my parents, my three brothers and I, we literally moved to Washington State 55 years ago. And I remember my mom saying, "We're here to work, and all four of you are here to study." And so we all went to public schools because private schools were not even a possibility for us at all. But we all benefited from public education. We all graduated. We all went to the University of Washington, and three of us have advanced degrees, thank God. So I absolutely believe in public schools, and all three of my children have graduated from Shorewood High. Go Thunderbirds. And they all went to University of Washington. And so I absolutely do believe public schools are opportunity, not just for immigrants, but for everyone. And so it is absolutely upon us to fully fund education as much as we can. And as one of the commenters said, districts are facing bankruptcy and facing really devastating cuts. And so I will absolutely advocate for higher special education funding, MSOCs, and transportation. I'm not sure that we can fully fund unless we can raise $12 billion. And I'm not sure that we have the votes to do that. And so it will be some help, I hope. And so all or nothing won't be working, because I've been asked not to come home until we fully fund education. But I want to go home, especially if we can come to an agreement about a balanced budget, then I do want to go home. And so all or nothing doesn't work. We absolutely have to be cognizant of some members who cannot vote for certain revenue bills, even Democrats, because some of them come from swing districts, and I love working with them, and I want them to come back. I've served for 4 years when we were in the majority by 50 to 48, and those were 4 very long years. And the Senate was in those days in the Republican control, and we had special session after special session. And I do not want to go back to that situation at all. And so I do want my Democratic cohorts to come back. And so please, when you see them voting no, please be kind to them. Even though they might personally want to, we will be telling them, please don't vote for this particular revenue bill, because we hopefully will have enough votes from the strongly Democratic districts like ours to be able to pass those bills, not just in the House. We obviously need to have them pass in the Senate as well, and hopefully not vetoed by the governor. And so it will be super hard next few weeks. So please be thoughtful. Please be gracious. And then if you do see improvements that we could make that are reasonable, please be sure to pass them on to us.
Great. Thank you so much, Rep. Ryu. Our next question is a question that's being tackled in your committee, I believe. So AI is growing fast, and a lot of people are worried about privacy and fairness. Can you explain how your bills, House Bill 1168 and 1170, help protect consumers and make AI more transparent?
Yes. So Representative Shavers, he's actually from a swing district, but he was brave enough to introduce AI policy bills again this year. He introduced them last year and did not make headways. And so he introduced them again, but unfortunately they both died in appropriations, one in appropriations and the other on the floor. So to just take a step back, obviously advanced technologies, including AI and sooner than we think, quantum computing will accelerate our concerns around technology facilitated violence against women, abuse of women. As we used to, they used to be done, I guess, not virtually, but physically. But now virtual is in the mix. For years, we've had facial recognition bias. It's getting better, they say, but I'm sure there's still some bias in that. And obviously, any kind of surveillance, and especially data mining, and especially when there is cybersecurity concerns, those technology concerns have been an issue for me for quite a few years. When I was a members of Color Caucus chair, I brought attention to the then Governor Inslee about the Department of Licensing sharing Washingtonians' data with the feds in the first Trump administration, which led to review and tightening of the data that we as a state gather and keep. And so he was able to have a special counsel, actually two, examine several of our agencies to reduce the possibility of data mining against our constituents. And over the last 15 years, I've been very supportive of Senator Olwell, especially when she was in the House, her ongoing work on protecting women and girls, including human trafficking and violence against women and girls. And so this session, she introduced Senate Bill 5106, which is concerning sexually explicit depictions of minors. And I hope I will have the opportunity to vote for it on the floor of the House, and so get that signed into law. And now, as the chair of the Technology, Economic Development, and Veterans Committee, I encouraged Representative Shavers to introduce House Bill 1168 again next year, as well as 1170. So one bill was dealing with the developers and the companies that develop, what are the ethical ways of developing them and so on. The other bill was about the consumer facing, what kinds of disclosures and transparency should they have the rights to? Because right now we have no guidelines or no laws as to what defines ethical use of AI, or even responsible use of AI, and other states do have those laws. And so it will be interesting. I think I mentioned House Bill 1205, which is my bill on prohibiting the knowing distribution of forged digital likeness, 1205. Fortunately, it has bipartisan support, so I'm really looking forward to it being signed into law this year. Absolutely, I will engage Washington Technology Solutions Agency, which is our technology agency for all state agencies on ethical and responsible use of technology in government, and that they actually are practicing responsible and ethical use. So I would love to show how they're using those guidelines for the state's use of AI, facial recognition, and any surveillance tools such as traffic and law enforcement cameras. And so since I just got the agency under my jurisdiction just this year, we have agreed to work on it over the interim as well as a lot more so that we can prove to the market, private market, that we actually can do it at the state level, that there are actually really good reasons to be doing it, so that when we are trying to pass future legislation for the general public and for the marketplace, the practices that we are already have put in place because of our, great state employees and their wish to do a really good job on behalf of our agencies and of course Washingtonians, we can show them it can be done. And so if we're doing it at the state level, then I would expect them to be doing that on behalf of our constituents. I also serve on the National Conference of State Legislators Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, Cybersecurity, and Privacy. And so I will continue to keep on top of digital policy issues as well as advocate for infrastructure investments in broadband availability throughout Washington state, as well as digital equity, which is, pretty aligned with AI and other advancements. And I also still have 2 more years remaining on my term with the FCC's Intergovernmental Advisory Committee. So hopefully the new commissioner does not disband that advisory committee, but is still willing to listen to us, I am hoping.
Great. Thank you so much. This is just a reminder that you're watching a live virtual town hall with your 32nd District Representative, Cindy Ryu, and you can submit your questions live in the comment section. Our next question is about a comparison of the Senate and House budgets. So the Senate budget includes furloughs for state workers while the House budget does not. What are your thoughts on this difference, and what do you think is the best approach to supporting state employees while balancing the budget?
Yeah. Having served my 15th year now, when I first came in 2011, I remember Governor Gregoire saying, "We've already cut all the fat off of our budget, so we are now cutting into the bone." It was not a pleasant year to serve, nor the next few years, even though I didn't serve on the Appropriations Committee at that time. And so I remember furloughing our state employees as a way to balance the budget. It did not work. It actually, I think, because work still needed to be done, and so we were asking state employees to do the same amount of work but not be paid for it. And so I think it increased resentment, may I say, and did not make working for the state a desirable job. And we don't pay state employees well at all. By any stretch of the imagination. And having come from the local government, I worked for both the city of Seattle and as a city council member in Shoreline and as mayor of Shoreline, I know the local government benefits were way better than my healthcare right now through the state. And so, comparing public sector employees to other public sector employees, but even worse comparison to private sector employees, because none of my children, other than the school teacher, will work for public sector because they don't get paid well. They know that's not a way for them to build their own wealth or their health of their financial situations. And so I know it's a public service for them to be serving. And so I do not agree that and the savings are very low by putting employees, federal state employees on furlough. And so for that little bit of savings, I think we do not I don't agree with furloughing. Instead, I think I've been mentioning a balance of new revenues and hopefully efficiencies and any funds that are budgeted for agencies. If they have not been able to use them, then claw them back at the front end rather than at the back end like we've been doing. So I think being smarter about how the cash flow, just like any household, but many times bigger, of being very thoughtful and looking at the cash flow and balancing it just like we all do, I think it's the right way to go. And so I am very thankful for the House budget writers who have been working so hard since last summer, and absolutely long hours, because their cars are here when I arrive and their cars are still here when I leave, sometimes quite late at night. And so I know they're still working very hard.
Great. Thank you so much for that response. Just another reminder that you can submit your question in the comments section. We're now going to go to another pre-submitted question. This one's on extreme weather. So with climate change increasing the risk of wildfires and extreme weather, what legislation have you worked on to help Washington prepare for and respond to natural disasters?
Yes. As a former insurance agent, I knew that the best way to be prepared for a disaster is mediating it before any disaster happens. And of course, becoming as resilient as possible, especially now that you see wildfires. And wildfires, even in urban situations, right? As we saw in Southern California this year, and of course, Lahaina last year. And then I'm from South Korea, and there are at least 43 wildfires going on in South Korea right now, and it's devastating to watch, especially people who are not able to pack their stuff out, or they are elderly and their home is the only thing they have. Some of them try to not be evacuated, and it's really sad to try to see them trying to be let out of their homes and basically forced out of their homes because they wanted to stay back and try to fight the fires, which is not possible. So anyway, I introduced a bill quite a few years ago after working for a year and a half with the Office of the Insurance Commissioner and insurance companies and many agencies on a Office of Resiliency. And then Governor Inslee was not prepared to open another office under his administration. And so we had to go about a different way. And so Representative Donaghy, who was one of my vice chairs on the committee that I chaired, she actually introduced another bill. And so since we had been talking about and working on how to be more resilient with the Military Department, which does emergency preparedness and disaster response. And so she introduced a bill, and she actually got it passed and signed into law so that a couple more FTEs could be funded at the Military Department to be more prepared. And so we've been little by little working on it. And then another committee that I'm serving on, which deals with insurance issues at Consumer Protection and Business, Representative Reeves has been introducing bills to make our homes more resilient, especially if there are conflagrations that might occur in the urban areas. For instance, many of our homes have shrubbery near our homes. Well, you need to clear 5 feet away from your home. Don't have any shrubbery or any plants, because if they are dry and an ember hits them, they become fuel. Many of us have wooden fences. If two homes are connected by wooden fences, they can go easily, even if the embers are not flying around because the winds are not blowing. They can go from one house to the next, jumping house to house. And so there's actually a really good resource and an institute in Cal Poly, I believe, that are a couple of different institutes that are working really hard on how to harden our homes and to make our homes more resistant and resilient in wildfire situations. And of course, in other areas, it would be wind and, of course, water damage is our number one, I believe, number one uh, uh, disaster, I guess. When your roof starts leaking, then you know you've got a problem. And then, of course, if there's wind associated with it, then you cannot find the roofer and you end up with a blue tarp on your roof. And that's really unsettling. So there are ways to harden your homes. Even just how your shingles are nailed in makes a huge difference. And as we start having stronger winds and drier summers, and not even just summers either, then we just have to be much more prepared. Other bills that we worked on were extreme weather shelters, and even local jurisdictions that were being asked, please provide drinking water or cooling shelters or warming shelters. They didn't have even a few $1,000s to open or even to provide over the weekend and so on. And so we, Representative Levitt had introduced several bills on those. And unfortunately, I don't think we're able to give out any of those grants this year. So we will see if there's other ways of helping them this year. But absolutely, if you see your neighbors, especially elderly neighbors, during either extreme cold or extreme heat, and you don't see them, please do a wellness checkup on them. Make sure that they're drinking enough and not having a heat stroke. Even if they're staying indoors and not outdoors, they can have a heat stroke. And so please check up on each other, because that's the best, I guess, response, neighbors helping neighbors.
What a lovely sentiment, Riprio. Neighbors helping neighbors. Just a reminder, we have about 10 minutes left in our virtual town hall event this evening. So if you have a question for Representative Ryu, please put it into the comments section now. Our next question is going to be around COLAs for TERS and PERS. So will you support and advocate for ongoing COLAs for TERS and PERS Plan 1 members?
Yes, absolutely. I've been very supportive. I know we haven't always been able to fund that, but I absolutely believe TERS teachers and PERS state employees, public employees, and many of them are women, and we tend to live a little longer, and we tend to get paid less even nowadays. And so I absolutely believe the COLAs are the cost of living adjustments up are absolutely necessary to keep retirees healthy, and so that they don't have to make choices between paying to heat their homes or paying for their medications or I guess food depends. My mom was able to feed us a family of 6 on very, very small budgets, because she would cut out a section of the yard to grow vegetables, and we couldn't even pay for the garbage fees, but I think we make people pay for them nowadays. And so she was an ultimate recycler and ultimate organic farmer, because she couldn't pay for the fertilizer either. But I think the COLAs, sorry, I'm wandering around. I must be tired. COLA definitely, absolutely will help keep our retirees healthier. And in the end, keeping them healthier and happier actually saves us a lot of money at the back end. And so, and you know, I think they deserve to have a decent life in their retirement years.
Great. Thank you so much. I know that you had previously spoken to me about answering some questions that you've gotten from your chat with Cindy's in district. So I just wanted to open it up and allow you to kind of answer some of those tonight.
Yes, absolutely. So I think I mentioned that we are definitely hearing both the Senate and the House our budget bills. They are different, and so hopefully we will pass them in a timely manner on each side, and then they will go into conference and negotiate. The budget writers will negotiate mightily hard, and so please continue to advocate, but please be kind even if you don't get everything you would like. It's going to be a tough year. So please be gracious, even if some Democrats that you think should be voting for new revenue bills, I'll be the first to tell them if we think that will jeopardize their returning to the legislature. I'll be the first to tell them, hey, let me go and get other people to vote for it, so you can literally come back and continue to work with us. So giving me grace, giving each other grace, obviously is going to be super important. Absolutely, we'll continue to fight for better funding of our schools. And as I mentioned, I absolutely believe in public schools and as fully funding public schools as possible. Another question I got was, what am I doing about the U.S. Canada situation, as well as the current, I guess, federal actions on the global side. Obviously, I'm at the state level, and we need to continue to encourage our U.S. senators and U.S. representatives to continue to represent us well. So a specific action that I was able to do, because I'm the current president of the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, and that is 5 Northwest states, including Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana, and Alaska, as well as 5 Western provinces and territories. And so, as the president of Pacific Northwest Economic Region, you can actually look it up by looking for PNWER, PNWER.org. And so we have drafted a op-ed, and I've submitted it to the Seattle Times. Hopefully they will carry it. Basically, it says that we, as members, have witnessed firsthand how nonpartisan cross-border collaborations can transform challenges into mutual opportunities that transcend political differences. And we are disheartened by the potential erosion of the US-Canada relationship that comes with the real threat of tariffs. Our successful history of trust, mutual respect, and cooperation must not be shattered by a failure to engage in good faith with one another. And even through world wars, terrorist attacks, economic downturns, trade disputes, global pandemic, both US and Canada have worked and fought side by side to address challenges, and we have both grown stronger as a result. So the trade relationship is woven into the fabric of each of our economies, and this historic partnership shares the world's largest and most comprehensive trading relationship. We have nearly 2.7 billion US dollars worth of goods and services crossing the border each and every day. Maybe a little less now because we have far fewer visitors from Canada now. These products support some of the industries that we rely upon most, such as food, energy, manufacturing, and agriculture. And of course, that translates to jobs. And so, as neighbors, our two nations built a prosperous and exemplary relationship that is the envy of the world. And so, we must not take this relationship for granted. And I do not take it for granted. And so I hope you will continue to let your Canadian friends and relatives know that, you know, even though it may not look like it, many of us at the state level are very concerned, and we absolutely are committed to working with our neighbors to the north.
Great. Thank you so much, Rep Ryu. So that was our last question of the evening. Thank you to everyone who participated and submitted a question, whether ahead of time or this evening live in the chat. I'm now going to turn it back over to Representative Ryu for some closing remarks. Rep. Ryu, would you like to begin?
Yes, thank you so very much, everyone, for your patience. I may not have answered all your questions. I hope you will email us. That's probably the easiest and fastest way. That way we don't misunderstand anything, and then we can respond to you. And if I don't know the answers, I'll make sure to find the answers for you and reply as comprehensively as possible. And then I tell this to other advocates, such as for the economic development local ADOs, is what we call them, that you should adopt a legislator. So please adopt me. I do try to represent you well. We may not always agree, especially on policy, and especially this year, I may not be able to fully fund what you like, but I will continue to work well to represent you well. I'll continue to work hard to represent you well. So let's stay in touch, and please let me know what you thought about today's virtual town hall.
Great, thank you so much. So that's all the time we have this evening. Thank you so much for attending and for submitting questions. If we did not get to your question, you can directly contact Rep. Ryu's office with your comments. Her contact information will be on the screen shortly. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.